This episode of UK Low Carb Podcast is sponsored by Deliciously Guilt-Free. Enjoy the show.
I am so delighted that I get to welcome back my good friend Pauline Cox back to UK Low Carb, and we now have a weekly series called The Pillars of Health. Each week, Pauline will dispel the misconception that if we eat well, then we're healthy. We'll explore together bad lifestyle habits, the stresses of life, poor sleep, lack of exercise, sedentary lifestyle, poor gut health, and poor liver function, and see how these can cause chronic illness and fatigue. The pillars of health are those key areas that we can take control over to live a happier and healthier life. And if you would like to engage in this conversation as we go through each week, then you may through our Facebook group, UK Low Carb. Now over to Pauline to tell us more. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the third episode in the Pillars of Health with Pauline Cox. Welcome back to UK Low Carb, Pauline. Thank you, Dan. Great to be here. Great to have you with us. And can I just say, I'm going to start today's show with a bit of a sad story. So this is me sharing something which is quite embarrassing at the time. But as I've understood the human body and as I've understood myself better, I understand what's going on now. So when I went to university, I put on quite a lot of weight quite quickly. I was always quite a thinner person as a teenager. I remember when I was 18, I kind of looked back at pictures thinking, you're probably worried about your weight, but you looked amazing. Went to university, put on quite a lot of weight, and then I went to India to work with some street children. And bearing in mind, I'm eating the same food that they're eating, and I wasn't a big eater really, but I was somebody who finds it very easy to make fat. It's just the way that my body is. And one of the children said to me, you must be about 35. Now, at the time, I was 23. So that is quite a significant difference in age. And I was horrified thinking, do I look older? And I spoke to one of the adults and they said, oh, no, in India, well, in this part of India, I don't know about the whole country, we can tell how old somebody is by how big they are, because the bigger they get, the older they get. And I thought to myself at the time, so basically, metabolically, they're looking at me like a 35 to 40-year-old, which is I'm 40 now. And they kind of judge and date you based on how big you are. Wow. And thinking on that story, that comes back to me because it makes me think, isn't it interesting how in the Western world, there's almost the acceptance that we put on weight, i.e. we store more fat around our bodies generally as we get older, and that older people carry more weight and younger people tend to be thinner. Now, I know that's not an absolute rule, of course, but it does tend to be that tendency of thought. And it makes me realize in hindsight now that I was kind of showing those signs of metabolic illness early, but everybody to some extent on the Western diet is just going through that at a different stage in their life. And that generally we are getting heavier as we get older because our amazing bodies, and I'm going to come to the liver, which is today's topic, our amazing bodies are fighting like crazy against this bad diet we're eating. And it's just getting exhausted and it's getting burnt out over time. And maybe I was showing that sooner, but we all on the Western diet are showing that as we go through life, and we're getting unhealthy because we can't tolerate the diets we're eating anymore. So maybe I'm just more intolerant to carbs and sugar and processed food than other people. Doesn't mean, however, it's good for them. So sorry to start with such a big rambling story, but I just thought that very much applies to what we're talking about today, which is the health of the liver.
Yes. And actually, Dan, what you're saying is really interesting because our body composition, we do have this acceptance that as we age, our body composition changes, and there are some reasons for changes in fat distribution, for example, hormonal changes. However, some recent research has indicated that metabolically wise, we don't actually slow down till our 60s. However, yes, which is really interesting because we've always thought that the metabolism really starts to slow down after about the age of 35, 40. But I believe, and this is not just an opinion, but there is a lot of research out there that will back this up, because we lose muscle mass, particularly women lose more muscle mass than men tend to. We lose muscle mass, and the muscles tend to be huge users of glucose. So whereas we're eating this, diet, maybe high in carbs, and all of a sudden our muscle mass starts to decline, we have this excess amount of sugar floating around the body that is no longer being used by the muscles, so it gets stored as fat. So when you're a sugar burner, you typically have less muscle mass, because during the night you're accessing these muscles to break down for sugar anyway, because the body can't cope with going that period of time. When you're a sugar burner, when you're a fat burner, it'll access the fat stores. And so we tend to lose more muscle mass as we age. Therefore, our sugar, our circulating blood sugars go up, and then our fat storage also increases. So retaining muscle mass is incredibly important for retaining not only strength and balance and, vitality in life. It's also very important for keeping your blood sugar stable and utilizing the fuel that you're consuming.
Wow, interesting. So, okay, so that's the muscles and how that changes over time. But let's go into detail on the liver, which I think is an incredible organ, which most of us take for granted. Really, we pretty much, as a society, mistreat our livers and decide that that's going to be there to like pick us up and sort us out, and we're going to chuck loads of rubbish at it. And I'm not talking, by the way, about drinking in particular. I know that people think they go out and they have, too much to drink, it's bad for their liver, and that's true. But we're talking day in, day out, meal in, meal out. The liver is doing so much for us. So can you tell us about how does it function? What does it do for us?
Yeah, the liver, as you mentioned, is a real workhorse, and it has a lot of jobs to do within the body, about over 500 functions in total. It's a large organ. It's about 3 pounds, and it's situated under the rib cage. And, one of the primary functions that we understand generally, is commonly known around with people, is that it works. It's our elimination system. It's a detoxification organ. It does a lot more than that. However, in terms of detoxification, it eliminates things within our body that we no longer want there. And when I talk about elimination and detoxification, I'm also talking about excess sex hormones, so estrogen particularly. And this is a huge problem for a lot of women who are estrogen dominant and find themselves with heavy periods and endometriosis, all of these symptoms that go with estrogen dominance. And a lot of it can be tracked back to poor liver function and our body just not being able to buffer this excess estrogen in the body. So we are seeing increasing amounts of liver congestion and fatty liver because of our modern diets, and the way we're eating is not well supported by the liver, or the liver doesn't like having such a high carb diet. So, I mentioned a moment ago about having this high level of glucose floating around the body. The first episode we spoke about, Dan, we spoke about the dual fuel burning situation. Yeah. Now, glucose, if we're eating a high carb meal day in, day out, glucose is there to be used as a fuel. The body's like, right, okay, we have all this glucose. What am I doing with the glucose? Firstly, it will replenish glycogen stores. So glycogen is the stored form of glucose in your liver and muscles. So it'll replenish glycogen stores. And then once it's replenished its glycogen stores and it's used whatever glucose it needs for energy. So let's say you're going for a jog, you're pretty active during the day. It'll use up that glucose, mop it up. Fine. You're not going to gain any weight. Let's say you're fairly sedentary. You don't have a particularly active lifestyle. You're not fasting for long periods of time or even much at all. You're eating at 9 o'clock at night. Then you wake up at 7 o'clock. Boom, you're having your porridge, your bananas, your breakfast. There's not a great deal of window for glycogen to be depleted. And again, we referred in that first episode to this sort of 14-hour window where your glycogen has been depleted. So now you have somewhere to replenish the reserves. So if we're not depleting our glycogen, and if we're not particularly active in using up glucose, that excess glucose gets converted into fat, and that fat is deposited in the liver and within the viscera and around the organs and on the body itself. So we start to see our weight creeping up, but also our liver starts to get this increased fat stored within it.
So your liver is trying to save you, really. It's trying to, it's trying to give you the healthiest lifestyle. It's trying to get rid of excess hormones. It's trying to get rid of the excess sugar that's in your bloodstream and store the glycogen for you.
Yeah.
So it's working harder and harder to do that. But we are filling it with fat because it is trying to take up all the excess sugar as fat in the liver, and then it can't deal with the hormones. It can't do the rest of it. So we're breaking it. And it can't do its job anymore. Was that what's happening?
Absolutely. And often you'll get the slimmer individuals who eat the third donut, licking the sugar off their lips, going, I can just get away with it. But their liver would tell a different story. And that's the thing with the liver. These fatty deposits, this congestion within the liver's such a great fall guy that you don't even necessarily symptoms of a dysfunctional or a fatty liver until quite far down the line. And, that's when you start to get these very generic symptoms that you wouldn't even associate with the liver, like fatigue or weakness. You might feel a bit nauseous in the mornings, but they're quite generic symptoms that could be related to multiple other things. And you don't think, hey, that's my liver telling me that I'm getting a bit fatty in here.
Yeah. And actually there's, I think David Unwin says this, and I think it's really powerful. He talks about the long silent scream of the liver. And this is before the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. So, just like I was saying about the analogy with, in India, where they're telling me that basically they can judge how old you are by how big you are. Your liver effectively for probably years before you even show that you're carrying extra weight, might be carrying a fatty liver and just storing it for you until the point where it can't. And then it's storing it around your organs and it's storing around the rest of your body. And that's happening while you're on the way to something like type 2 diabetes. And by the way, that's the thing that people misunderstand. It's not the fact you're carrying excess fat, which is causing these other metabolic diseases. They are all symptoms of the metabolic problem of excess sugar and carbs and insulin resistance in the first place, aren't they?
Absolutely. And the liver, as you very rightfully said, is trying its best to do a job under very difficult circumstances. Yeah. And the liver, another primary function of the liver is to produce bile, which is really incredibly important. This substance that's produced in the liver, some of it, about 50% of it, is condensed in the gallbladder. The other 50%, which for those of you who've had your gallbladder removed, you're still producing bile. It's just less than, it's less concentrated, and you'll have less of it than if you have a gallbladder, but you are still producing bile. So you get bile housed in the gallbladder and then bile directly into the duodenum. And then this bile is incredibly important for breaking down, emulsifying, and accessing the fats and the fat-soluble nutrients that your body needs. So if you're lacking in bile, you start becoming deficient in some of these key fat-soluble nutrients like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E. And you can start to get all these secondary symptoms from poor liver function, like dry skin or visual problems. Night blindness is a classic one for liver function because you're not getting your vitamin A from your fat, your lovely foods that have all these rich nutrients in. You're just not accessing them. So having a well-functioning liver is very important for detoxification, but it's also really important for being able to access the nutrients, the fat-bound nutrients within our foods, so that we get the nutrients needed for healthy skin and eyes and proper functioning of all the different systems.
So, pardon the silly, well, maybe not silly, but simplistic question. What exactly is fatty liver then? What is going on there? So is it the excess glycogen literally is being stored in the liver cells as fat? Is that what it is?
That's a great question. It's not a silly question at all, because you wonder to yourself, well, what does a fatty liver actually look like? Is it?
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I'd love to see a comparison. Yeah.
So a fatty liver, it's when essentially the liver cells are replaced by adipose cells. So fat is literally deposited. Imagine a liver that looks like the liver you would eat from, your butcher. So beautiful,
maroon, dark,
a nice,
rich
healthy,
coloured.
Yeah, beautiful dark red with that silvery sheen on it. Now think of cutting that in half and seeing this mosaic pattern of fat. So we're literally talking about
like a ribeye inside.
Yeah,
sounds delicious.
And also
to eat, maybe not live with. Yeah, okay.
And then imagine that this liver starts to become inflamed and it swells. So it swells in size, it swells with fat, and it becomes enlarged with these fat deposits and inflammation. Okay. And that's why sometimes, so if you're lying on your left side at night and you start to feel like these cardiac issues, so maybe heart pain or racing heart, and it just feels uncomfortable, and you've had, your doctor's cleared you of any actual cardiac issues and heart problems, that could be that your liver is enlarged and it's impinging on this quite tight space that your heart has. And, people who have enlarged livers typically much prefer to lie on their right side than their left side. So you get these very quirky symptoms of enlarged livers and inflamed livers and fatty livers, like red palms, hands and feet, this discomfort on lying on your left side. So you can get this enlargement and this inflammation. Now, the inflammation, the stage after inflammation, is scar tissue. So you don't want to get scar fibrosing in the liver, because that's more challenging to reverse. Whereas when it's at the stage of being fatty and a bit inflamed, at that point, we can still do a lot to reverse. The liver's a very forgiving organ, and it can become healthy given the right circumstances and the right attention. Within 2 to 3 years, your liver can really become this beautiful pink, healthy looking focus again.
So I've actually heard that in fact, when you have a when you have a transplant of a liver, you just have to have part of the liver and it will actually grow again to make the whole liver, which is incredible. I didn't realize it's such a vibrant, healthy part of your body which regenerates itself, which is incredible. Yes. So there's never the end. You can always heal your liver by changing your lifestyle. And actually, when you're just saying there about eating a human fatty liver, I'm not a cannibal. But I was thinking about eating that liver. Then I just suddenly thought foie gras. That is exactly what that is. People fatten up the livers of ducks and geese. Or whatever it is you're eating, you can fatten it up the animal's liver by feeding it corn, which we're told is healthy. In fact, you should have that in a bowl with some milk and sugar and you'll be healthy from it. So it just seems incredible that that's what we feed animals to give them fatty liver. Sorry, so many things coming in now. The other thing I was just thinking there as well, I think David Unwin said, but I've heard other doctors say this too, when they find somebody with fatty liver, they kind of assume, well, it's not fair to say they assume, but a lot of them think straight away that the person must be a drinker, that, you must be a fairly heavy alcoholic drinker to have fatty liver. But that's not the case, is it? Because we're seeing this happen now. How big do you think fatty liver as a problem? And is it growing? Is it something that gets reported as being a bigger issue than it was in the past?
Yeah, it's a huge problem, actually, Dan. In fact, the most recent figures I looked at for the US were 90 million Americans have some degree of fatty liver. So
out of 300 million or something. Blooming heck.
It's a huge, huge proportion of the population. And it's now being seen more in children. So as you rightly pointed out, there's the alcoholic fatty liver, and then there's the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And it's driven by obesity, hugely correlated with obesity. So it's our dietary choices that are driving this fatty liver. And so when we have this excess amount of fructose and glucose, so sugars within our diet, and actually ethanol, which is alcohol, and fructose have very similar reactions within the liver. And that's why you'll see this non-alcoholic fatty liver and fatty liver, alcoholic fatty liver, they have a very similar sort of pathology, really, because ethanol, again, is something the body, it can't use for fuel. It doesn't have a function. So the body has to, actually, when you drink alcohol, not that I'm against anyone drinking alcohol, it's your choice, but it's really important to understand what happens to the alcohol within the liver. The liver really wants to get rid of the alcohol very quickly because it's damaging to the body. So it halts all detoxification processes. It uses up a huge amount of something called glutathione, which is our body's master antioxidant. And glutathione helps to diminish the inflammation. It's very good at kind of dampening down the fire. So glutathione levels are really important. We want to keep our glutathione levels high to help with the detoxification process. So let me simplify this. You have two-phase system within the liver. So phase 1 to phase 2. And this is where we take fat-soluble toxins and we convert them to water-soluble toxins ready for excretion. And the intermediary phase between 1 and 2, that toxin is highly unstable. And that's where glutathione comes in and neutralizes it and calms the situation down. So the better your stores of glutathione, the less toxic that process of elimination within the liver. So alcohol uses up a lot of glutathione, as does a lot of these toxic foods that our body certainly doesn't want in. And even toxins from our environment and our body care products and cleaning products, car fumes, toxins are all around us and our liver has to process all of them.
Blooming heck. So, wow. Okay, Pauline, there's so many questions coming in now. So I'm going to try and stay on topic, but would you mind explaining to me what inflammation actually is? Because I can see something that's inflamed, you know, like you have a cut, it's red around it. That's inflammation, isn't it? I understand it's a natural process in the body to deal with an issue quite often. Well, always, I suppose. But what actually is going on there? Would you mind? And if you don't want to talk about this is fine. But
no.
What is it? I've always want to know.
It's a really good question because, you know, inflammation, as you very rightly pointed out, is a very, very important process, a very important process for us to survive. It's a protective mechanism. So if I was to cut my thumb, absolutely, I want inflammation. I want this rush of white blood cells. The immune system kicks in. You get a swelling, a throbbing, and the healing process starts. So all of the macrophages and parts of the immune system are there to ensure that any microbes and bacteria that have entered into my cut are dealt with. So inflammation is an incredibly important part of our survival, and it's a mechanism that kicks in to prevent us from being injured and dying essentially from a bacterial invasion or from a cut that could otherwise kill us. Now, inflammation becomes problematic when it's sustained and inappropriately switched on. So let's take the gut, for example. When we have this leaky gut situation going on, if we have bad gut bacteria within our gut, they're producing something called endotoxins. These are compounds that are toxic, and they are coming out of the bad bacteria. And these endotoxins can pass through into the bloodstream via this leaky gut situation, and they'll trigger an immune reaction. But if that bad bacteria is constantly there and this leaky gut situation is constantly there, then the immune system's been constantly triggered to say there's an invader, high alert, and that low grade, or even higher grade in some individuals, but low grade systemic inflammation is damaging to tissues and organs and systems within the body if it's continuous. So inflammation is almost like stress. In short bouts, stress is very good for us. It helps us to adapt. But in long, sustained periods, it has a negative impact on our body.
So it's a chronic inflammation. It's like a lifelong inflammation that many of us are going through, including the liver in this instance. So it's under that continual stress until, I guess, in the point it just can't do it anymore. I mean, is there like a liver failure eventually? Where are we heading in the end with regards to the liver? And if we don't change our lifestyle, and if we are, we can talk about in a moment what the symptoms of having fatty liver, because I think that's very important to know. But if we just carried on in that route, I mean, what happens in the end? Well,
sadly, fatty liver is one of the biggest causes or drivers of liver replacement. So, it is right. You get to this point where you have inflammation, then that inflammation becomes scar tissue, and then you have liver failure or even liver cancer. So the two, liver failure and liver cancer, are highly correlated with fatty liver. So it gets to that point where I think it's around 15% fat within the liver is considered fatty liver. Right. And it's not easy to detect. You can't just kind of look down and go, or pee on a stick, or it's not a very easy process to figure out, do I have fatty liver? But an ultrasound can give a pretty good indication as to how much fat is within your liver. But I like to make the assumption that based on my previous lifestyle, my high carb diet, my high sugar diet, the fact that I was on the pill for many years, so I was on this medication, I was drinking alcohol as a student and quite a lot of it. I like to make the assumption that my liver needs a little bit of attention. And about 10 years ago, I decided that my liver most definitely needed attention. I was tired all the time. I was anemic, I had skin issues, my hormones were all over the place, I had polycystic ovarian syndrome. So all of these different things that were telling me that my gut needs addressing, my liver needs addressing, and regardless of what medication I might be offered, I wanted to really get to the root cause to improve these areas so that for the rest of my life, these organs were well supported and functioning at a better level.
So can I just ask you on that then? So what do you think the symptoms that, without going for scans and stuff, that someone like me or someone listening, what are we looking out for? Do you say you were tired, chronic fatigue? Is that one of them?
Oh, I mean, I was exhausted, but that can come from, so many...
having kids doesn't help, does it?
Well, yeah, we tend to get tired when we're not producing energy efficiently. So when you have poor energy function, like our mitochondria might be dysfunctional because we're feeding it glucose all the time. So they just become less efficient. They become we mentioned inflammation. Our mitochondria, dysfunctional mitochondria, are a source of inflammation in themselves. And, inflammation, low-grade inflammation is like a fire. It can rapidly spread. So you get these dysfunctional mitochondria, neighboring other mitochondria become dysfunctional and upset. So before you know it, your energy producing system's just not brilliant anyway. But in the liver itself, you're probably experiencing some level of fatigue and weakness, maybe some nausea. But again, we're talking quite far down the line with the liver at this stage, even to be getting those early symptoms. I think for women particularly, hormonal fluctuations are a really good indicator of liver function. And the liver tags excess estrogen, and then bile removes the estrogen and eliminates it. So if your bile production is not great, then you want to be thinking, how well's my liver functioning? So constipation is a good indicator of bile production. It might also be that you're low in magnesium, because when we're low in magnesium, our bowel, which is a muscle, can tighten up and get tightened, and like other areas of the body, muscle stiffness, and that's an indication of low magnesium. However, if your bile production is low, then constipation is inevitable. Excess estrogen is going to keep on the high, and then you start getting these symptoms of estrogen dominance. So it's kind of like detective work, Dan. You're trying to track back not just a symptom, but where's that actually coming from? And these systems like the gut and the liver, the mitochondria, which are all over the body in every cell, bar the red blood cells, they all interplay and work together. So it's trying to take these multiple pillars and working on all of them at an individual level. So what am I doing to support my liver? What am I doing to support my gut? What am I doing to support my mitochondria through the foods I'm choosing to fuel myself with?
So in that case, then, what are the steps? What are your tips for someone who, thinks, I think I probably have insulin resistance. I think I have this problem with my liver happening. It's becoming a fatty liver. What sort of the main steps that you can do to really address this pillar of health?
That's a great question, because they're actually quite simple steps. Firstly, it's looking at what you're eating. We're always told that fruit is really healthy, and we could start the day with a big salad bowl, a fruit salad of pineapple and mango and grapes and all these really high fructose fruits. You want to be looking at the sugars you're eating or even what the food you're eating is turning into and how that's impacting your liver. So low sugar fruits, you don't want to overconsume fructose. You certainly don't want a giant glass of orange juice, which is just pure fructose. Low sugar fruits such as blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, all the delicious berries, which absolutely. And those berries are still going to be feeding and supporting your gut microbiome, but they're not going to be compromising your liver. So finding the fruits that you enjoy that are still low sugar, replacing your high carb foods like your wheat and your pastas and your cakes and breads, and finding low carb alternatives that aren't going to have that same impact on your glucose, your blood sugar levels, but then has an impact on your liver, because your liver's thinking, well, now I have to store it somewhere, fills the liver, and then it starts to get outside of the liver into the viscera and the surrounding organs. Fasting is a very efficient way of drawing the fat out of your liver and utilizing that fat, essentially sucking the fat out of the liver, as I like to visualize it. So when you're fasting, your body is going to use up any excess triglycerides, circulating triglycerides. It's going to use the fat from the liver. It's a really efficient way of starting to hugely improve the function, the health of your liver, as well as your gut, as well as your biomarkers, your, as I mentioned, triglycerides. So I think starting to look at, okay, where am I going to incorporate fasting into my week? Maybe I do it twice a week. Maybe I just start by shifting breakfast along to 10 a.m. or might try 2 meals a day instead of 3. Start to incorporate some windows of eating into your day. It might even be that you say to start with, I am not eating after 7 o'clock. I'm going to give myself a cutoff, and boom, after that, I'm just not eating. So you're starting to introduce some new habits to allow your body to enter this state of fat burning and removing fat from areas of the body that it shouldn't be. And then there's a couple of other things, if you don't mind me carrying on.
Please do. I'm learning so much here. Go for it.
Choline-rich foods are excellent, again, for improving liver function and helping with fatty liver. So eggs, when people are told they have fatty liver, they might be thinking, oh my gosh, I need to go on a low-fat diet and cut out my eggs. But actually, eggs are a very rich source of choline and can be very helpful for removing the fat within the liver and utilizing that fat.
Okay. I eat a lot of eggs. That's good to know.
Yes. And then something called milk thistle is also very good at helping with bile stimulation. And the most recent research I read around milk thistle was that it can improve your liver function by up to 36%. So I take fermented milk thistle, not every day. I would say I take fermented milk thistle probably 3 times a week.
Sorry, what is that then? What is fermented milk thistle?
Well, milk thistle is a plant. But there's a bioactive compound within the milk thistle that really helps support liver function. Now, fermented milk thistle just makes it more bioavailable. And this is a product developed by Graham Botfield, who's a genius when it comes to gut microbiomes. And he works for Living Nutrition. So I use their fermented milk thistle product for supporting my liver function and at the same time supporting my gut microbiome. So it's part of my routine for introducing good gut bacteria, but also something that's going to have an impact on my liver function as well. So then the other things you want to do to support your liver are B vitamins, protein, glutathione-rich foods. So all the things that the liver needs to do its job well. The liver, to do its job well, can't be congested or can't be overly congested. Mm-hmm. It needs to not have as excess toxins coming in that it can get out. So the rate of toxins coming in can't exceed the rate that it can actually eliminate them. Otherwise, you get toxin buildup within the fat cells in the body. And it also needs the nutrients to support the activities, the chemical reactions going on within the liver. And that's things like B vitamins. It needs protein, amino acids, and glutathione, which is that master antioxidant I was talking about earlier. And glutathione you can find in food itself. So avocados are a nice source of glutathione, pecans, but then the elements that the body can take and make its own glutathione, so sulfur and selenium, you'll find in Brazil nuts and mushrooms. So again, very whole foods that can help to build your own source of glutathione or eating foods that are already rich in glutathione.
Wow. You know what I absolutely love about the way you talk, Pauline? You start with a very scientific, quite a complex starting point, and then you realize the foods that you eat aren't actually like, expensive supplements you have to sort of fly in from different parts of the world, but they're actually foods that are available that we can eat now. We just have to cut out the sugar and the carbs in the process and eat, like you just said there, more whole foods. And generally, because we've evolved to eat them, everything works itself out. It's not as complicated as at first it seems when you realize the solution is actually a whole food, proper low carbohydrate diet.
Absolutely. And fasting. So in a nutshell, to support our gut and our liver, we want to be non-sedentary. So just getting out and walking every morning, just getting out in the sunshine, breathing in the fresh air, then maybe having a window of fasting if you can do that. And if it's appropriate for you, again, if you're making any major dietary changes, you want to consult with your doctor. If you're diabetic or have any underlying chronic health issues, obviously, again, consult with your doctor. But finding these windows of eating so that you're stabilizing blood sugars, you're allowing your body to start to use its machinery for fat burning. So you're changing your body composition, you're improving your metabolic rate, you're improving your gut health, which has huge influence on the rest of the body. And when you start to feel better, I'm sure you'd agree with this, Dan, you make better choices. So it becomes this kind of upward vortex of
very positive
choices.
Cycle, isn't it? Yeah, definitely. Yes. And on the fasting front as well, something that when I first heard about this at the Low Carb conference in California in 2017, and they were all talking about fasting, and I was like, oh my God, this sounds miserable. I knew there's a catch. I knew low carb must have something horrific in it, and I found it. But what's interesting is, now, and I've done 5-day fast. So we have the Wolf Pack, who are a group of listeners, and we fast together for up to 5 days in a window, but it could be 16 hours, it could be 5 days, whatever anyone wants to do. And it's funny how the first time you do it, you think, brace yourself. And then you go, oh, hang on, I've just not eaten for 3 days here. It's actually okay, you know, or I've not eaten, I've just skipped a meal, for instance. That might be the place where people are listening now. And you think it's a big deal, and then you can very easily get used to it. And you and I both know it's now like 1:30. We've not eaten a thing since yesterday. We're in different places. We're at dinner together, but I don't mean that. But we know we haven't eaten since yesterday, and yet we feel absolutely fine, don't we? I'm speaking for myself, I do. And you get used to it very quickly, and you realize you understand how your body works and how it needs and doesn't need food. And it's okay to not eat as well as to when to eat. And I think that's a healthy thing to learn about yourself.
Absolutely. And to recognize that we have this natural mechanism that kicks in to burn our stores of food. And these wonderful compounds called ketones are produced that will give you this clarity of thought, that energize you, that are very, very anti-inflammatory. They have this ability to literally transform your health, particularly brain function. I mean, we spoke about insulin resistance at one point, where insulin resistance is a state where your body's not able to access that glucose. You might be eating all this food in the hope that it makes you feel better and energized, but your cells aren't actually able to access that glucose to use for fuel. So you become, particularly in the brain, and we get insulin resistance in the brain, we become very brain fogged and fatigued, and we can't concentrate, and we become quite low in our energy and our mood. And there are certain conditions such as Alzheimer's and other neurological conditions, neurodegenerative conditions, that we see these states of hypometabolism, so low levels of metabolism within the brain that can't access the fuel they need to function. So these neurons start to switch off.
To death, I suppose, yeah.
They do, essentially, yes. Now, that's when glucose is the primary source of fuel. It's not able to draw it into the cell anymore, into the neuron. Now, ketones are not an on-demand fuel like glucose is. They will just push themselves into the cell, into the neurons, and then you have an alternative source of fuel that nourishes the brain.
And it comes from the liver, of course, ketones, don't they?
Absolutely, yeah. They're produced in the liver. So you need a healthy liver in order to get these wonderful ketones around the body. And you know, dietary choices is a big part, and lifestyle choices is a big part in your baseline circulating levels of ketones.
Now, everyone, just imagine this. Imagine we had a world full of Paulines and people like her who can actually help us have a happier and healthier life. And then you would only need to see your GP when you have an accident or something happens and you need to be patched up again, rather than a lifestyle which is out of control, Western diet based, and then the NHS or whatever medical health services you have in your country is trying to patch you up, and it can't patch you up. This, I think, in all honesty, is the future. You know, this coaching, and I hope it's helped you so far. There's more to come, I'm glad to say. But this sort of coaching will actually make your life healthier in the first place, so that you can avoid these health issues that are coming down the line to many of us because of the lifestyle we're living at the moment. And I think that's really powerful, Pauline, what you've told me today, and the last 2 weeks as well. It's been, mind is blown right now.
Dan, I think it's really interesting that when people take on some of these health habits and really embrace them, it's life-changing. You know, we put these limits on ourselves. Oh, I'm old now. It's my age. I'm just tired because of work, etc., etc. Our body has this amazing capacity to adapt and change. Yeah. And when you unlock that capacity, it's like someone switches life into full color again. And you start wondering, A, why didn't I do this before? And B, why didn't anyone tell me about this? How have I not known this, gone through 40, 50 years of life and not known this? But don't ever let age be a barrier to stopping you making these changes, because the body has an infinite capacity to change at any point and at any age.
Really positive finish there. Thank you so much, Pauline, for another fabulous episode. When I said, could you do a series, I was like hoping you'd be able to do something pretty spectacular, but this is beyond any of my expectations. So thank you so much for today. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. And I think you've earned a very well-earned break after this. So I hope Gaz, your partner, can look after you this afternoon and give you the earned rest
He's
you need.
He's up to get me a lamb chop, I think.
Hey, the whole Pavlov's dog thing again. I'm hungry, right? But thank you so much.